Welcome to Surroundscapes, a video and audio podcast series that covers the world of commercial AV with special reference to Bluesound Professional. In this part of the series, we're covering a partner spotlight, talking to one of the businesses that Bluesound Professional works with as part of our larger product offering. My name is Graeme Harrison and I'm the General Manager of Bluesound Professional. And in today's episode, I'm talking to Jeff McSpadden, the co-founder and CEO of Composure, about why he formed the company, how it's grown, and why he favors using Bluesound Professional as his hardware. It's a fascinating look into the therapeutic uses of music and audio, and it's available now on your favorite podcast app, on our social media channels, or on surroundscapes.bluesound.com. So hello, Jeff.
Hi, Graeme. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's lovely to chat to you again. Yeah. This is going to be a really interesting episode for me because when we founded the company, I was really focused on really the hospitality and retail verticals and streaming music. And this is very different to that. And it's one of the things as the company's grown that I found us growing into. So this is going to be great, particularly because I think I'm going to learn a lot in this episode. What I want to start with, though, is your history, Jeff. What did you do before you did Composure?
Yeah, I come from a background of being a musician and composer, so really a creative professional. In my early years, I was a trumpet player in sort of jazz, classical, and pop music settings. And that really sort of morphed into a composing career through writing arrangements for bands and different things that I was doing at the time. And really just I formed a real affinity and love for the craft and the artistry of writing music, particularly for film, TV, and advertising, which was my main sort of work that I did. Never really got into the concert music composing scene, but being able to help support a story, help tell the story of a brand, provide pacing and emotional underpinning for, something that people are witnessing on screen that, isn't otherwise represented. That was a huge kick for me. So worked for decades doing that. And, all along the way, always had this thirst and curiosity for what is it that's happening to us as humans when we hear sounds, music being one variation of sound. But, what happens when we're listening to nature and man-made unintentional sounds and everything. So I started digging into, research and so forth that helps us kind of understand the neurological effect of sound. And that really helped sort of form the thesis around the company.
So I was going to ask you kind of what led you to give up that career of that sounds like it was exciting and successful. Was it just did you want to get out of that business, or just as you did more and more research, it just got more and more interesting for you? Or
yeah, I mean, I think the tipping point was really that at the time that I was considering this sort of change in my career path, there was some really interesting new technologies coming out. There was a lot of, like I said, new research and findings around the impact of sound on the human experience that was starting to come out. A lot of really interesting new avenues for music and sound to be applied functionally in our daily lives instead of just in the realm of entertainment. And I think it just encouraged me to kind of start exploring that a little bit more. And so Composure, I really started the sort of core mission around this company was formed around the convergence, the crossroads between music and sound, technology, and overall well-being and healthcare.
So this is interesting to me because I'm really passionate about the role of sound in our day-to-day experiences and the fact that we have five senses, but in a lot of business, we really concentrate on just one of them, the sense of sight. And um, elevating the position of sound in our everyday life, being an audio guy, is a passion to me. So, having decided to do this, how did you go about kind of working out where you might fit and what areas were unexplored? And also, who did you do it with? I believe your job title is co-founder, so I presume there's someone else involved in this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I will answer that, but something you said earlier just triggered a thought, which is Julian Treasure, who I think you're familiar with, and he has this beautiful phrase that he's used in the past: the tyranny of the eyes. How we as a species seem to be very visually biased and very visually influenced. But I've always kind of found it fascinating that our eyes are something that we can close if we want to shut the world off, but our ears are always open and they're taking in the world with high specificity. The word all around us, up, above, below, around, even behind, and it's that the way we've evolved as a species to react to sounds is instinctual. It's very primary, so it's part of our base, kind of like the earliest core parts of our brains. It doesn't, well, like, another quote I love is Leonard Bernstein, and it's not, this isn't a direct quote, but essentially the essence of what he meant was that music and sound are the only things that don't first have to be considered by the mind. They go straight to the heart. It's a reflexive, you like something, you dislike something, you react, you don't react. There's something just primal about it that isn't something we typically experience through our other senses in the same way.
Yeah, I know Julian very well, actually. We met at TED about 15 years ago, and we've done a book together and lecture tours together and all sorts of stuff. And another thing he said is that we don't have earlids. It's the only one of our senses that we can't turn off. We can close our eyes. We can not touch something. We can hold our breath and not smell something. We can choose not to put something in our mouth and not taste it. But there's no way of cutting off sound. It's always there.
And I think by extension that what that typically means is that the everyday person going about their life is largely unaware of the impact and the depth of the impact that the sound of their environment is having on them. Mm-hmm. Even the absence of sound is significant. A sound designer friend of mine, we were in a conversation once where she was saying that the reason that horror films are so they activate that fight or flight response is because when sound is taken away, that's when there's a sign of danger, yep, which reflects the fetal experience in utero. If we were used to the din of the mother's sounds and all of those bodily functions happening, and then all of a sudden everything went silent, that's a big signal of danger. Yep. So just on a basic human wiring level, but anyway, I digress a little bit. You were asking a bit about how we started the company and how we chose this path and so forth. And by the way, my co-founder is Roland Dubois. He's a really sort of a Renaissance guy by core definition, but essentially a user experience, user interface design expert, and which is kind of something I tease him about sometimes, because what we've essentially created now has no UI. So he's our co-founder. We are still a very small team, so it's essentially the two of us. But we started out actually developing a VR product, a web-based VR product. And without going into a lot of detail, it was a music and sound based experience, virtual experience, where it was open-ended and the user could have some agency in manipulating the sounds and objects that are associated with them in their field of view. And it was designed to be this open-ended, calming experience. And VR was then, and arguably in certain circles still, a not widely adopted technology. It was becoming increasingly difficult for us to, maintain that course. So when we kind of dissected what was happening there, we actually had some help doing some formal research with that VR experience and the impact it was having for people. It was actually becoming clear that it was the sound that was doing all the heavy lifting. That all the main benefits that people were getting from it wasn't from that virtual experience so much as just the very nature of the sounds that we were using. So from there, we said, okay, we'll drop that medium, and then we will continue on developing this thesis around customized and personalized sound experiences. We went through a few different iterations and prototypes of things that served a very specific population. And then at the same time, started conducting formal research in a memory care facility in Pennsylvania. We were introduced to the CEO of this organization that was really interested in applying sound in a therapeutic way for their memory care unit. And this is, residents that live there full time that are somewhere on the dementia spectrum, the dementia journey, and working with an outside research organization, we started looking at different facets of daily living that could benefit the most from applying sound to it. The one area that was sort of an aha moment for us was sleep. Helping people get a better night's sleep was not only something that we could actively measure and look at, but we could then also look at how it impacts the whole 24-hour cycle. And not just for the individual residents, but for the care staff and the community as a whole. So that's really the impetus for what we developed into our current product called Sound Blanket. Is that research and the process of doing that. And there's a lot to unpack there about how we approach that and all the ingredients that went into it. But getting to the punchline, we were all very pleasantly surprised with the outcomes that we saw when we applied sound in a strategic way to help people sleep better.
Mm-hmm. So that's a fascinating, it gives me a much better idea of how you got to where you got to. How did you work out what sort of audio content would help? What was that process?
Well, that really kind of pulled from my prior experience as a composer quite a lot, and that craft and that experience of, whenever I was writing a piece of underscore for a film or for a TV production, you look at each scene and each sort of, part of the project as under that jobs to be done kind of framework, right? What's the creative brief? What is it that the director is trying to convey? What is it that you want audiences to experience and feel from this? And when we started working with this researcher in memory care and with their staff and their whole organization, it became kind of clear that there's a one-to-one kind of relationship here to composing for film, composing a sleep experience. And I looked at it as, okay, what are the jobs to be done here? Where are the friction points? What are the things that are unique to people living with dementia and their sleep, and what could best support them? And so we kind of broke it down. There's essentially three big areas that need to be addressed with sleep and people living with dementia. And this is also highly specific to living with dementia in a congregate care setting, right? Because these are multi-purpose buildings. These are structures that are meant for people to work in, but also people to live in full time. And those don't make happy bedfellows sometimes. Pun intended, actually. So we looked at it and we said, okay, well, one of the things that's a big issue for people living with dementia and sleep is even just transitioning from the active daytime period to going to sleep and recognizing when bedtime is. Some people call it scaffolding, how you scaffold from one activity to the next. Some people call it transitioning. Some people call it cueing. But essentially, it's all the same thing. It's like, how do you help somebody without taking their elbow and guiding them to, bed, which has all kinds of ramifications. How do you gently remind them and help ease them into that period of the night? So after cueing someone, you actually have to, help them reduce their anxiety, reduce their, any sort of issues they might have that is preventing them from falling asleep. So we call that calming, right? So you got cueing at the first, and then you've got calming. And then once people are asleep, the third big job to be done there was, how do you maintain good rest through the night without frequent waking, without, having just light stage sleep that's not very restorative? How can you encourage better rest? And so that's when we looked at covering. So cueing and calming and then covering. And really that is, applying some sound masking principles. However, there's also, not just in the results that we saw in our study, but there's others published research out there that there's a correlation between certain frequencies and better sleep. So pink noise being a big part of that. Mm-hmm. So we kind of took all those jobs to be done and all the sort of, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and then, applied that through the sort of creative filter that I brought to the table as a composer. And we brought in a couple other composers to add elements and to kind of collaboratively work on this. And we created a sequence of sounds that lasts up to 8 hours. And that sequence, takes all of those different pain points and sort of problem sets and addresses them appropriately with sound.
So you worked on this, and then you had to actually deploy it. How did you get your first customer? Was it an actual customer, or was it a beta test customer that just allowed you to experiment, or what was that process?
Well, before you and I met and we got even aware of Bluesound, the research project I was talking about was actually conducted in a facility that had an IP speaker system pre-installed. It was something that the developers had considered and put in mostly for announcements and alarms and that kind of thing. So we worked with them to kind of, adjust the settings for the speakers to faithfully reproduce our sounds and so forth. But we learned a lot from the limitations of that system. And we said, okay, well, let's wait to see if the research is a success. And if it is, we will look to productize. And by productize, I mean, how do we take the best of what we were able to do in this research setting and reproduce that and be able to faithfully distribute that to other settings. So once we kind of learned all of those lessons, that's when we heard about you guys. We heard about the capabilities and the fidelity of the speaker units, and it just all of the things that we were looking for kind of clicked in place once we found you guys. Mm-hmm. And so, understanding what the hardware piece and the sort of underlying software, components of that look like, we were able to kind of develop around that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, now we have a fully deployable system that really helps to standardize deployment for us and also assures the same quality for each location where we are.
So with this research establishment, were they aware of a problem they wanted to solve? Were they looking actively for a way of helping people with dementia get through the night? And were they aware that sound might have a place in that? Or did you come along to them and say, hey, can we try this? Or
well, it's interesting. I think the genesis of us getting to meet them goes back a few years beforehand, where the CEO of this organization that we worked with on this research, he had attended a conference where a presenter was talking about the power of sound in clinical settings, hospitals and so forth. And there's a lot of very interesting, work being done to try and, in an effort to synchronize all the bloops and bleeps and alarms and the environmental sounds of these very frenetic and somewhat, disturbing and distracting clinical environments. So it was really on a thesis level, talking about the importance of bringing better health through sound that way. So he was really fascinated with that. And through sort of, a few iterations and explorations, we were introduced to this organization, and they had firm commitments in their hearts for exploring this territory. We were still exploring these different prototypes and iterations, but I expressed sort of the thesis of our company being that we know we can leverage technology to reliably deliver therapeutic experiences. And, there's more to it than that, but that's the broad sort of retelling of it. And there was just an immediate affinity. And so we said, let's get going on a research initiative. And because the research produced such promising results, that gave us all the faith to go forward. And then that organization essentially became our first customer. So they were our first. They continue to be our customer, and we just crossed the 2-year mark with them, where they're using our sound blanket service every night for all of their residents. And to sort of quote our lead researcher that was working with us at the time, this is a very high performing organization. They don't really, they're not one of these facilities that have a lot of issues that they need to solve. It's really about how can we improve on great. And that's why we were so excited with the results that we got, because we actually were able to show and demonstrate that we can improve on great already. So it's been really great to be working with them on a consistent basis. And really, it blossomed from there. It was a lot of word of mouth. It was a lot of, once our study was published in medical journals and peer-reviewed journals, that, as you may or may not know, in the healthcare setting that's where our customers live, that speaks volumes. This isn't just a nice shiny toy. It's not a theoretical thing. This is something that has some actual teeth to it and really works.
So I want to get into kind of how you've grown the company since then. But before I do that, there's one element that when you were talking about it, I want to kind of think about, which is how much individualization is there in this? Is this a one-size-fits-all solution, or is there individualization for different types of residents in these facilities?
Yeah, I mean, the vision is to go hyper-personalized. Currently, the way we're able to sort of deploy this and create that sort of reliability and standardization of deployment across lots of different locations is not a one-size-fits-all, but kind of a 3-size-fits-all. So what I mean by that is there are a lot of different parameters that we consider to be personalized. So one of them being the timing of when we deploy sounds, right? Or I shouldn't say deploy, when we administer sounds. We really think of ourselves as a non-pharmacological intervention. And so kind of aligning our language around the pharmacological world is something that seems to resonate with our customers. So being able to administer these sounds at a very specific time on an individualized basis, that's part of the personalization. Also, we're talking about an older adult population, and some of them have hearing challenges. And usually at nighttime when people are sleeping, if they wear hearing aids during the day, they'll take them out at night.
Sure.
So we want to be able to sort of dial in the right volume setting that benefits them individually. So, and there's other things involved too, but we kind of we help our customers understand the personalization by kind of aligning it with cough medicine. I know this sounds really strange, but
it does a bit.
what I mean by that is that if you go to the drugstore, you've got a bad cough, you look at the little bottles of liquid, they essentially all have the same active ingredient in it, but they give it a couple different flavors. And it's the flavoring that helps get that active ingredient in.
Right.
Right. Now, it's not 1,000 flavors. So like we don't do a long Spotify type playlist, right, that you can choose from. A lot of what we do and what we've learned through trial and error, a lot of my journey personally as the founder and the company as an entity has been a lot of trial and error and learning along the way. But a lot of what we do is look at where those sort of main friction points are for the residents and for the caregivers and for the organization. So those are our three constituents, our three stakeholders that we're really keeping in mind. So we want the personalization and the customization to feel right for the residents so they get better sleep, but we want the operability and to be as light a touch and as set it and forget it as possible so that it benefits the caregivers, that we're not overloading them, and then the standardization and the ease of deployment and setup and ongoing execution. And, the way our service offsets a lot of other heavier costs really benefit those operators and in their operational budgets.
So the personalization element of it, is that something you set, or does the resident have the ability to tweak things themselves?
So unfortunately, I mean, we would love to be able to have the residents make the adjustments themselves. But in the case of someone living with dementia, a lot of things are a challenge. A lot of very basic things are a challenge. So what we generally do when we're bringing on a new facility or customer is we work with the frontline care staff. And we say, okay, you work with these folks every day. You know their personal preferences, their habits, their routines. Here's essentially 4 different settings per individual that you need to help us decide and dial in.
So you mentioned that you had this one customer that was your research establishment and it's turned out to be a customer. You also mentioned the research and the peer reviews and the articles, and I was originally a research chemist, so I'm quite familiar with that environment of publishing papers and getting building your reputation on the back of the work you've done.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
It's painful.
So I got out of chemistry in my mid-20s and got into the music industry. But,
smart.
Yeah, it's turned out to be a fun career over the last 40 years or so. But how did people then come to you and say, I hear, I've seen what you're doing here. Can you come in and do that same thing for us?
Yes and no. The yeses are fairly small and limited, but and some of what's encouraged that type of response from potential customers has been the community we were talking about earlier, actively talking us up, sharing our mutual research findings and being able to sort of mutually benefit from that and dissemination of that research. The other sort of main activities that I've, again, through trial and error learned are very important in the industry that we're selling into, are the trade shows and the conferences, and not from a booth perspective necessarily at this stage of our company, but more being on stage and being able to share the research, being able to share some of our expertise and our unique approach to solving a very ubiquitous problem in the industry, which is poor sleep. Particularly in dementia care settings, but throughout the spectrum of the industry. And so, the customer acquisition it's kind of a blend of different activities and a different, and going forward, we're really anxious to develop some partnerships that, have a, extensive install base, for lack of a better term, or more accurate term, of our clientele and our customers. And because I think we're still in a stage where we're letting the sort of cement dry on the foundation of our house, if you will. And that cement is all the research findings, all the case studies, all of that sort of foundational evidence, and then we can start putting the walls up and so forth on the rest of the structure, because again, in a healthcare arena, evidence is everything. Yeah.
Do you find it's interesting? You were talking about your first customer already being a great facility and this being kind of the icing on the cake. And you also talked about word of mouth. Do you find that customers that use you and therefore get better results and have more satisfied customers are happy to share that secret with other people? Or do they want to keep it to themselves because it's a competitive advantage?
So what we found to be very interesting is that we seem to sort of align best with the nonprofit operator side of the market in senior living, in long-term care, memory care, and so forth. So the nonprofit world is, they're driven by different, kind of mission-driven things, right? Sure. And we fit that more readily. And what's also interesting is the behaviors on the nonprofit side is that they are more willing to share. They are more willing to actually have affiliation groups and things that are, about raising the standard of care in their industry. The rising tide raises all boats kind of mentality.
Sure.
The for-profit side has different needs and different challenges and opportunities. And, we're really right now trying to get our foundation of business on that nonprofit.
Yeah, that's interesting. We find that to a certain extent in our business more broadly, that we make very high performing audio equipment, and the people that appreciate that the best are the people that already have pretty good systems. It's not the people that could most benefit from it in many ways. We've focused a lot on the residents, but you mentioned them a few minutes ago. The actual carers themselves, does what you do impact their life, their stress levels, their retention, that kind of thing? Is there evidence on that side as well?
Yeah, there is. And actually within that initial pilot study, that the research that we have published, we looked at residents as the primary demographic, but secondarily, we were also looking at staff outcomes. And by the way, we conducted this research at the tail end of the sort of COVID lockdown era, when hospitals and care settings were just, overworking their staff. And, there was a lot of tumult for, I guess you could say. And what we found was, as a secondary benefit to residents sleeping better and then ultimately performing better through the day, there was far less stress, far less disassociation. So, being sort of emotionally locked away from the functional tasks of the day,
right.
And less absenteeism, there was benefits clearly being shown on the staff side and the caregiving side. Furthermore, what we didn't heavily measure in that particular study, but we've been seeing since, is that when residents are sleeping better and they're up and down less through the night, these frequent wakings that are so common in dementia, when you reduce that, you're actually reducing the risk for falls and the incidence of falls. Mm-hmm. And falling in care settings is something that is a very stressful experience for the entire organization, but particularly for the caregivers. And so, helping communities sort of connect the dots between improving their sleep protocols and care routines and reducing that fall risk has been a huge for us, and to do it non-pharmacologically, right? To do it in a way where there are no downsides to what we do. Mm-hmm. Sure. There are inherent risks to other interventions like medications and other interventions. There is only upside. There is no downside to what we're putting into these facilities. So.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you're still quite a small company, but where do you sit at the moment in terms of like that tipping point where things accelerate and you get a critical mass of customers?
Yeah, I'll let you know. I honestly, we're starting to be able to, a lot of the early days, you could probably echo this sentiment as well, but a lot of the early days of the company is so much about just push. And, how many people can you dial? How many people can you commit to meetings? How many people can you convert? And it's all that sort of outbound kind of activity that really makes the difference in those early days. We're starting to reach the point where we can start to transition into, more, I heard this beautiful quote the other day about be a well, not a waterfall. Mm-hmm. And by being a well, people have to come to you for their water, right? We're not, and I'm looking forward to the day of not being I wasn't really a waterfall as so much as a fire hose to our market. So I'm really to sort of reach that point. But the critical mass conversation is something that we're still kind of wrapping our heads around a little bit, and when we're going to reach that.
Yeah, I've seen this in several businesses that I've worked within and been through the process, and I'm actually seeing it with Bluesound Pro at the moment, which is, the way I think of it in my head is like pushing a big rock up a hill. And when you're starting, you're pushing that rock up a hill. It's hard work. You have to you can't let it slip. It's continuous. Right. And then you get to a point where you're getting towards the top of the hill and the slope slackens off a bit, and you're still pushing, but it feels easier. And then we're at this inflection point with Bluesound Pro, and I've seen it in previous businesses. You get to the point where the rock begins to roll down the other side of the hill, and you build momentum, and then it all becomes easier. And at that point, your role is to ride the wave, if you like, and also to make sure you don't become complacent and you continue to innovate so other people can't catch the same wave. Right. And it sounds like you're at the point where the slope's beginning to slacken off a little bit and things are beginning to be easier.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, that's the way it's feeling. We're definitely taking some new strategies now that we're at the beginning of this year, and the strategies themselves start to become a little more clearly defined through trial and error and experience, and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's definitely an exciting time. I mean, we're ready to take all comers,
Mm-hmm. So one element of what you do that I'm kind of interested in is, do you have any thoughts around making the whole process more interactive? So, for example, incorporating sensor inputs and being able to react, to be able to tweak what's actually coming out of the speakers, fed by input of what's going on in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have completed our first pilot with a customer in which we're using a third-party sensor device primarily right now just to gather data and look at what are those sort of meaningful data points. Because when it comes to tracking sleep and all the available devices that are out there for that, one, you want to assure quality and consistency in the data gathering, and two, there's a lot of things that are really interesting on the consumer level, the individual consumer level for their sleep performance, that are not really translational to a kind of group or care facility kind of level of data. And so we're really taking these early steps right now to understand what's most meaningful, what's most impactful, and then once we've identified that, it's how do we translate that into a response? You know, I've always been sort of critical about, like, I love that there are amazing companies out there doing data gathering, and their whole business model is around gathering and then reflecting data back, to hopefully elicit change. But you always face the now what question. Like, if you've got something that's tracking your sleep at home every night, that's great. But now what? Is it giving you recommendations to change your sleep habits? Is it change what actively is happening there? And most of the time, it means you as an individual have to you have to look at yourself in the mirror, and you have to make some decisions and make some changes. So to your point, we're looking at how we can be the logical answer to the now what question. To say, okay, now we understand what data is really meaningful for our market and our demographic and the challenges that we're trying to address with sleep, particularly for now in dementia care. And then how do we effectively and responsibly respond to those data inputs? So one of the ways we're looking to do that, as I mentioned, we're doing some piloting right now, but we're also about to apply for a government grant with the NIH to really explore that very thing. How can we take where we are in our sort of primary understanding of all of this with sleep issues and all the sort of parameters and changes and variables that present itself in the areas that we're in, and expand on that and be able to find some of those common threads and those things that we can really respond to with sound very effectively to impact better change. So and better sleep outcomes. We're still so bullish about impacting the quality of sleep for people because of how critical that is to our just functioning every day. And just a quick side note too, one of the questions we get asked a lot about, well, why are you using sound to do this? Why that particular expression or medium? For a dementia population, you may have seen these videos over the past few years of people who are nearly frozen in their, or somewhat seeming catatonic through the progression of the disease. But then you put on their favorite music and they come alive and they blossom and they respond. There's a famous woman, this video of this woman who's 90 and far progressed in dementia. She was a ballerina as a teenager, and then they put on Swan Lake, and she starts to do all of the moves that from decades and decades ago. So what's going on there is that they discovered that the core parts of our brain that process sound are largely unaffected by the progression of the disease of dementia and Alzheimer's. So as it starts to eat away and deteriorate at all the frontal temporal parts, the language processing parts, all of that, the core experience of how our bodies and our neurology responds to music and sound as a stimulus, that's one of the last senses to go.
Wow, that's fascinating and comforting to me, because sound is so much a part of my life, that knowing that that's one of the last things to go is it's kind of comforting. We talked earlier a little bit about Julian Treasure and his work in soundscaping and biophilic soundscaping. They do a lot of generative soundscapes where there's different ways that things can be blended together and they never repeat. And back in the day, I was chatting to Tim Westergren, who founded Pandora, about how you can. He was talking about how he wanted to be able to let people tweak the algorithm a little more granularly than the broad thumbs up, thumbs down. So it might be like the time frame's more important than the geography or the harmonic structure or whatever. And you'll probably you'll cringe when I ask this question, but in an era where AI is becoming more and more prevalent, and we're seeing the use of AI in music curation certainly and music creation, how do you see that playing into your future?
Yeah, it's something we ask ourselves a lot on a fairly regular basis, especially when we start looking at how can we be more responsive using data, sensor data as an input. It's an open-ended question in our minds because, traditionally, and this is not knocking all the amazing, more newer innovations in AI. Traditionally, I have not been moved by music, let's say, that's been created by AI. There is something, you call it what you will, the uncanny valley or whatever the effect is. There's just something that does not stir my soul. And I really feel that's a critical element to music and sound being applied in a functional way to everyday living. Now, I think that when it comes to biophilic soundscaping, I think there's actually a lot more liberty you can take with AI and generative audio. But when it comes to what we're trying to do, which is sort of taking the best of music and the best of frequency response to fulfill a task, we haven't cracked that code yet about how AI is going to benefit us. I think that, like with all things, I sort of described this a couple times already, but me as an entrepreneur and as a CEO and a co-founder and the company itself, it's just this process of, stacking up skills and learning and falling on our faces and then coming back and, pushing that boulder up the hill as you were describing a little bit. That I think we're going to get to a day where our discoveries and our lessons learned are going to point us in the right direction where AI plays a role. Whether that's in the actual creation and delivery of the sound or it's something on the back end that plays a almost like an engine type of role, with other aspects of how we do our service. It will definitely be in there. It's already in my workflow as someone who's just writing a ton and, expressing and kind of considering lots of different aspects. I use it as a consultant, but more or less, different AIs. So it's undeniable the impact it's going to have on society and the world, but how it influences us and what we do, I'm still a little bit cautious.
Sure. Yeah, I'd encourage you and our listeners, if you haven't already done so, to listen to the music of Holly Herndon and her album Proto, particularly, which is a really interesting use of AI, both as a compositional and a performative tool. It's not music that you will either love it or hate it. There is no middle ground. I've not talked to anyone that's had a middle ground. It was okay type reaction. You will love it or you will hate it. It is like nothing else. But a lot of what you were talking about, as I get older and I have more trouble sleeping, hopefully not because of dementia yet, but just getting older and needing to get up anyway during the night to go for a pee. I can see a lot of benefit from a lot of what you're doing. Do you have aspirations to bring it out of kind of a healthcare environment into a more general environment?
Yeah, and there's actually kind of a logical path that we see, just given our immediate market that we're selling to. There's different levels of care that are represented in this senior living world. We're sort of at that. Gosh, this is the wrong word, so forgive me, but sort of at that end stage, the sort of latter stage. But a lot of these communities are encouraging people to move in, as early as possible. And so you get the sort of 60 and up crowd, and those are consumers. Those are people living at home, doing their own thing, and we see them as a really interesting way to discover what those differences are and what we need to do to make it a great experience for them, and not shoot ourselves in the foot in the efficacy of what we're doing, right? Because once you start getting into kind of a direct to consumer type of model, it's very tempting to just want to feature stack and please. And I think a lot of what we need to stay true to going forward is that core thesis and that core set of benefits that we provide. And it's going to fit a lot of people, but how that evolves and what that looks like in the future is still a little bit of a question mark. I do think, though, to your larger point, we would, we were talking previously, sleep is a human problem. You just said yourself, there's challenges as you age. There's challenges for new parents and their newborns, and there's all through stages of life. I mean, you depending on what source you look at, there's something like half the planet reports poor or insufficient amounts of sleep. So that's 4 billion people. And we're really just hyper focused on serving a small subsect of that overall population. And part of that thesis too is that, it's almost kind of similar to what they say in the accessibility world, which is if you can solve for people with certain developmental challenges or, neurological challenges, like is the case with dementia, you're actually making strides in solving problems for everybody.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. So as we move towards the end of this conversation, although I could talk to you for hours about this,
likewise,
I have a couple of kind of last questions for you that may meld together. One is, what do you see the future of Composure as being? And the other one is, are there any last things that you want to mention?
The future of the company is something that I like to kind of be a little coy about, because one, it's a perpetual sense of discovery and in sort of what are the signals that we're getting that help drive us in the right direction. But, from a broad sort of thesis, what we see is, again, trying to address sleep for all of humanity. That's a huge bite to take. Mm-hmm. But if we can actually progress through the realm of healthcare, institutionalized healthcare and beyond, we can actually set ourselves up with a really solid foundation to grow from, because there are a lot of available free apps and this kind of sound thing and this kind of sleep thing and this meditation app, those are a dime a dozen. I mean, literally a dime a dozen. Yeah. And I have no interest in trying to be the signal through that noise. We really feel like expanding and kind of growing horizontally across different industries that are involved in healthcare first is going to be our path to a more readily mass adoptable solution for consumers and growing that way. That's just sort of from the business perspective, right? About how we see the future of the company. I mean, what drives us every day is our mission of leveraging sound and technology for human thriving. Sleep is how we're expressing that now, solving for sleep issues. And I still think that if we never sort of evolve anything beyond just that topic of sleep, I'm going to be a happy guy. It's such a juicy problem and just such a juicy thing to dive into. But beyond that, there are just myriad ways where that can be expressed. And I think, to Bluesound's credit, that's essentially at the core of what you're doing every time you put in, a system at a stadium or a system in a hotel, is you're aiding in the opportunity for sound to improve people's lives.
Yeah, we take that really seriously. That's a passion that however we can help people's life experiences is great. We don't have an ego about it. We provide hardware, but the really important thing is what that hardware enables. I don't want people to look at our stuff and say, "Oh, that's such a cool box." It's like, no, my experience of being in that space was better. Yeah. And I also get you being coy, because like you, we try to grow in response to our customers rather than this kind of, we have a rough line where we see ourselves going, but that's already been tweaked significantly since the beginning of the company. I mean, our collaboration with you is a great example of that. I wouldn't have thought that our gear would have been used in these environments when we started. I'm immensely glad, in fact, hugely gratified that it is, because it allows a more tangible benefit in a way. It makes me feel a lot better about what it is we do on the grand scale. But we're very, very keen to ensure that we don't kind of act as God and say this is the path forward, but listen to those people that are a lot closer to the end result than we are. Right. And so I agree with your philosophy. Any last things you want to say before we wrap it up?
Well, I think you sort of expressed what is at the core of what we're about too, which is that, yes, we have this product and service that can be installed. It's called Sound Blanket. It's a remotely managed service that improves sleep at night. But it's really, to what you were saying about your own products, it's about what it enables. Mm-hmm. And it enables the opportunity for people to get better rest. And what that does is enable all these amazing benefits throughout the day. Yeah. We all live better when we've slept. Yep. And conversely, we all live worse when we haven't slept. It's the opposite is also true. So I'm just really excited about being in partnership with you guys, being able to assure very high quality, very high performance of our service out in the world, and know that every night we're continuing to add to the count of people getting a better night's rest. It's amazing.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Jeff. And to you listeners, we hope you liked this episode of the show. We're releasing new episodes each Tuesday, and they're available on your favorite podcast apps. Although probably the easiest way is to go to our website, bluesoundprofessional.com, and look for the Surroundscapes podcast within that. Jeff, how's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can visit our website. That's probably the easiest, which is composure.care, COMPOSURE.care, to learn about our service there. And then you can readily find me on LinkedIn and other sort of social platforms, although I these days I'm kind of biased to LinkedIn. I don't know why. It's where most of our market is, I think. But it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and it's always a great time to talk with you.
Great. Likewise. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thank you.